Okay. Well, the title of my talk, as you may or may not know, is Shipwrecks around Cape Elizabeth and vicinity. The card notice that we got was a little different from that, but anyway, that's what it's going to be. Now, I have two stacks of sheets here. One is the dates with the names of the wrecks, and then as I come to a more interesting name that I have information on, I will cross-reference to the other. So, well, as we all know, any major seaport constitutes more traffic than in and out of the port around that vicinity than where there are no ports. So, consequently, the Cape Elizabeth being on the lee shore of most of our storms, probably more than average ships came ashore on the Cape Elizabeth shores. So, and between 1780 and the present time, there have been more than 80 wrecks that I've been able to find out about. And a greater part of these happened before 1920 because there was more traffic. After 1920, the shipping pretty well dropped off, and so that accounts for that part of it. As we know, the modern means of navigation is pretty foolproof, but in the early days, with just the simple instruments that they had, and it was not too accurate, and so oftentimes it was by guess, and if they didn't guess right, then it was too late to do something about it. So in the bad weather and the fog and rain, you just had to estimate your speed and your drift and all this. So it took a lot of experience, but even the professionals didn't always hit it. So and of course, along our shore, we had the Cape Elizabeth Life-Saving Station in the later years, and they played a big part in saving a good many lives of these wrecks when they could get at them. But there were times when the seas were so bad that were just hopeless, so that was something else. So the first wreck that I have recorded was in 1780, was a British schooner, the Nancy, and it happened on February 12th, but I have no details on this as to what happened and whatnot. So anyway, that was the beginning of it. So then it goes on. I'll just read a few dates and names. These were all schooners. 1843 was the schooner Clarissa. 1852 was the Harold, was a total loss. And 1854 was the Louisa, small 70-ton schooner. And then in 55 was a brig, the Foster. And then in 57 was the Bat Tasmania. She was only 386 tons, but that was a fairly good-sized boat at the time, but it's small in our modern ships. So in 1857, the Bat Tasmania of 386 tons, not a very large vessel, came ashore May 10th. This ship had arrived at Portland from Liverpool for supplies to go to Nassau. Upon leaving in the fog, Captain Stickney came nearer to the Cape shore than he intended to, and so came ashore. It was calm at the time, but the bottom was knocked out of his vessel, and there she stayed. Her cargo of iron and crockery was salvaged, but the salt cargo was ruined. The next year, the little schooner Abigail, coming from the east, missed the harbor entrance in the fog, came ashore on the end of the Cape. And in 1861, the schooner Susan also came ashore at Dyer's Point. So we come in 1858 and 63, two more schooners, the Halcyon, the Reaper, And then in 1872, the Idaho, and that was saved. So we go back a little bit, probably to the Bohemian. I think probably most of you have heard of the Bohemian. That was probably one of the most outstanding wrecks on the Cape, and really was a lot talked about, and it was quite important. So this was an English passenger and freight steamer that carried some sail, and on February 22nd, 1864, as she was coming into the harbor in the fog, but with calm seas, struck Alden's Rock. Because of a large hole ripped in the bottom, even though Captain ordered full speed ahead for shore, the entering seawater put the boiler fires out, and that was so they just drifted from then on. And even though they were only a quarter mile off Staples Point, they drifted a bit more in towards Maxwell Point. And in the panic that followed, in launching the first lifeboat capsized and 16 people lost their lives. And in more panic, and casualties came from all the confusion, and out of a crew of 99 and with 218 passengers, 42 lives were lost. And she had a general cargo said to be worth $1 million. Quite a bit was salvaged, and quite a bit ended up in the neighborhood homes. It was really a very exciting affair. I remember hearing said about our grandmother Murray's, and that she finally wrote a letter home from Cuba saying that she would like to hear some news about the family instead of the Bohemian. So then we go on. There's several other schooners, mostly small vessels, really. And the Wendell Burpee in 1901, these were wrecks at Broad Cove. That was probably the area where the most wrecks occurred. And in 1901, on April 7th, during a northeast storm with wind and rain, the three-masted schooner Wendell Burpee, while trying to beat her way into Portland with a load of soft coal, ran onto the rocks near Broad Cove. She had gotten into trouble, tried to anchor, but the chain parted and came ashore. And despite the efforts of the crew of the life-saving station at the Cape, 3 men were lost and 1 was saved. And then we move on to Trundy's Reef, because that's not too far from Broad Cove. So there was, in 1804, the first one reported there was the brig Apollo, and she had arrived from Suriname with a cargo of molasses, sugar, and coffee. This is Suriname is in the Dutch East Indies, in South America, West Indies. So then goes on 1836 with the schooner the Concord, and then in 44 the bark Isidore, and then there was a brig in 47, and Northerner, and the Catherine Beale. In 66, the schooner Catherine Beale sprung a leak coming into Portland. The crew abandoned it off Ram Island. However, it did not sink and finally grounded on Trundy's Reef. It was reported the next day, and a tug was summoned, but by the time she came out, the vessel broke up. In 1865, a shattered hull came ashore near the light station, but it was never identified. Apparently it had run ashore in a storm on Staples Point, that's near Hannaford Cove, and broke up, and nobody ever knew anything about it. So, and later in 1871, in August, the schooner Sarah with 4,000 bushels of corn struck the rocks of Trundy's Reef. The crew left it, later floated ashore where most of the cargo was salvaged. And right after the year 1872 began, the schooner Idaho, loaded with coal, on her way into Portland, ran ashore and brought coal, but was eventually pulled free. It also, apparently in 1869 in September, there was a tremendous gale, and between Small Point and Wood Island there were 30 vessels lost, and with 16 men in that one storm. So, and then there was, of course, more schooners. The little Fanny, a fishing schooner, went ashore at Trundy's Reef in '75, and the G&B Morse, the Rosie Nada, the Winner, the Eastern Queen, Fortuna, Go and Get 'em. And then in 1918, the schooner Herman F. Kimball ran ashore. It touched on Trundy's Reef, but it slid over the ledge and came ashore at Long Point, and that was the first wreck I had seen, even though I was pretty small. But it was loaded with lumber, and it was on its way from Windsor, Nova Scotia, bound for Boston. And even though it was calm, the schooner started leaking, and as the crew were tired from pumping, it was all hand pumps, from all power pumps, the captain decided to go into Portland for repairs. There again, the captain made a wrong guess because it was foggy, and so he wasn't where he thought he was, and so he hit on Trundy's Reef. But however, he slid over the rock, and the next land he saw was Long Point at People Cove, but he couldn't come about quick enough, and so this vessel just backed in there, and it was calm, so stayed for several days. And the men this was September 5th, 1915, and the men got together, and teams of 2 unloaded the lumber from the schooner, and the captain could have a third of it, and the men kept the other 2/3 each. So each pile, they had their own pile of lumber. My dad was one of the men, and in fact, we had it for years, and the last few pieces was used in our place at Hanover Cove, and the rebuilding of it. That was Nova Scotia spruce. So, because I wasn't allowed, I was only 5 years old at the time, so my 2 older brothers were allowed to go out to where the schooner was. I wasn't, but my older brother invited the captain and the mate and the cook and the deckhand to come in for breakfast. This schooner ran on the night before, and nobody knew it till the next morning. So I did get to see them at that time. So then a couple of years after that, in the same place, the schooner Pocasset, also loaded with lumber from Windsor, Nova Scotia, struck on Trundy's Reef on November 21 during a gale. And she had, as I said, had a cargo of lumber from Windsor. However, she had been en route for several months, and being old, built in 1847, her hull was in terrible shape, and so would limp from port to port a short distance, having to put in quite often for repairs. And she had left Booth Bay Harbor that morning with several other schooners, but as the day progressed, the weather worsened. Well, the other schooners put into Portland, but by noontime she was still off Halfway Rock, and then the weather closed in, and she lost her way or made her own guess again, and she ended up in Trundy's Reef. Well, she stayed there all night before the Coast Guard watch sighted her, but they took the crew off in the breeches buoy, so they were all saved. The schooner, of course, broke up. But the lumber was spread all over the coast. So then there's, from 1920 to 1970, there were no wrecks until December 5th, 1972. And during the snowstorm, probably you all remember the drag of the Alton B that ran on Trundy's Reef, and the utility boat, Coast Guard boat, came out to help it, and they got a rope wrapped around their propeller, and they went ashore too. So they salvaged the Coast Guard boat, but the dragger was a total loss. So then we come to Portland Head, because there were a great many wrecks there too, and there were 18 disasters that I have run across. Probably the largest being the bark, the Annie C. McGuire, because the name is out in front of Portland Head on the rocks. And before this, in 1830, the ship Macedonia struck on Portland Head on November 30th. In 1887, the schooner D.W. Hammond lost her sails in a storm while entering the harbor and came ashore. And on August 7th, 1914, the steamer Bay State ran ashore, just punched a hole in the bow, but they were able to pull it off, and of course she sailed a long time after that. And in October 4, 1932, the fishing schooner Lochinvar ran on right outside, because it's very deep water right outside of Portland Head, and the crew almost lost their lives. The fishing schooner sunk so quickly. But the Annie McGuire was a former clipper ship, the Golden State. And as she got older, they cut her rig down, and she was a much slower boat. And she was in the trade between Argentina and Portland. And they were coming into Portland. This was Christmas Eve, and they hit a snowstorm and lost their way, and that's how they got ashore on Portland Head. Well, this boat didn't break up right off, and they salvaged the spars and quite a bit of equipment before, and some of the cargo too. But the hull finally broke up. And I just mentioned this in Cape Elizabeth, but across the channel in 1905, the passenger steamer California ran on Ram Island on February 25th at 1:30. And according to our grandfather Murray, our grandmother's diary, our grandfather reported the passengers were all taken off, and the ship was later salvaged. And another steamer, the Manhattan, was ashore at Rime Island Ledge a little later, and was on the rocks for 5 weeks, but was removed and later sailed, and it later caught fire in Portland Harbor. So that picture on the card over there is a picture of it after it burned. Then on April 9th in 1940, the three-mast schooner Stephen Bennett was rammed and sunk by the steamer Southwark off Portland Head, and one life was lost. And then in 1900, the partnership, the Governor Dingley, that used to run from Portland to Boston, ran into a fishing schooner, the Manette, and sunk it. And in 1905, she ran into another schooner out there, a three-masted schooner, the Sarah Smith. And so she had rather a bad record. So next we come, well, it was a bark in 1831 that ran ashore at Ship Cove, the bark North Star, that's inside of Portland Head. And then we come to Spring Point, that's way in where the lighthouse is now. And there was, because even though that was way in the harbor, there were quite a few vessels ran on there. And the schooner Nancy ran on September 8, 1832, and the ship Madrid foundered on the ledge, carrying Irish immigrants, and many perished. Also the schooners Mazathawn, Seguin, Salmon Pool, and the Smith Tuttle. And this, the bark, the Harriet Jackson, which is the white one in the picture, she was a beautiful vessel, but she was coming in Portland Harbor in a terrible storm. There was no cargo, and she misstayed and ran ashore on the ledge. This was before the lighthouse was built there, but she was later repaired and patched up and floated, and she served many years after that. Then here. Then in Danforth Cove, way further in, there's a schooner, the Kendrick Fish, fairly good size, 143 tons, misstayed and went ashore there in a gale, coming into the harbor. Then Simonton Cove, which is now Willard Beach, there was several wrecks there that came ashore. Like in 1837, a Galen, a brig, 1841, Traveler, a sloop, 43, lighter, schooner, and 1878, Saladin was a schooner. And then we come to McKinney Point. I guess that's down off the Tulite State Park, south of there. In 1862, the schooner Gannett. 75, the schooner Dray was a small schooner. And then the Bay State, which I think you all are pretty familiar with. Yeah. Well, anyway, the Bay State, of course, was bound to Portland from Boston, and here again the captain it was in the fog, and the captain didn't guess his position just right and turned a little too soon to go into Portland Harbor, and ended up on Holocon Ledge right off McKinney Point, and she never did come off. They salvaged quite a bit of it. No passengers were lost. They could almost step ashore at low tide with all their baggage and everything. So she finally broke. That was September 23rd. She ran ashore, and finally in November she broke in two and came to all pieces. Then, of course, in 1947, I think probably a lot of you remember the Okie Alexander, the collier that they was beached there. She was coming from Hampton Roads with a load of coal, and there was a big storm, and the captain set off, because the lightship was way off position. That was a real big storm. And the captain said the bow came up. As they came up on a wave, and the bow kind of wagged like this and and it went down and it broke off. Well, the bulkhead held so the boat didn't sink, and they turned around before the sea, and the nearest land was off where it ended up, off High Head there. And they rescued all the crew with breeches buoy. The Coast Guard did that. And so then we come to Richmond Island. There were a great many wrecks there, and in that area these are mostly schooners. 44 was the schooner Echo, 52 the Rose, Livonia in 73, the Nellie Bowers, that was a three-masted schooner in 88. And in 89, the little sloop, the L.A. Merriman, 45 tons, was loaded with cabbage, because when they were growing, using Richmond Island to grow vegetables, they had to ship them to Portland by scow or schooner, so that's how that came about. Then the 97 was a schooner Winner, 1912 the Empress, 1939 was a dragger, the Connie Murray, and in 73 the dragger Mascot, bound for Portland from Jeffrey's Ledge, and in a northeast storm, a total loss, but skipper Ed Fowler and mate Mark Macaron reached shore, found shelter in a shack for the night. Next morning, crossed the breakwater at low tide to mainland, and to let their families know of their plight. And also, a 35-foot cruiser came ashore in Chimney Rock inside of there. And then Alden's Rock, that's off the Cape further. There's the brig, the Sierra, another brig, the United States, in 1834. And because in 1906, or the Fortuna, in 1934, the Sagamore was a New York to Portland, New York Eastern Steamship freighter, left Portland January 9th at around midnight in a snowstorm. Well, as they went out the harbor, the wind was blowing northeast, and it blew them down to Leewardmore, and they ran on to, they hit Alden Rock. Well, they were leaking pretty badly, but they kept going, and they had to make for shore, so they headed for Prout's Neck, and that's where it ended up. So they saved the crew, but and some of the cargo, but the ship was a total loss. And another, I'll go back to 1922, another wreck I happen to remember was the old Collier, the Middlesex. She was coming into Portland with a load of coal, and in those days, Trundy's Reef buoy was in nearer the shore, and Willard Rock was out on the other side of the channel. Well, now the buoy they moved it out, so it's outside of everything. Anyway, the Middlesex ran on this Willard Rock, and it was in May 18th. And it was there most of the summer, and they tried to remove the coal. They used all the lighters and barges and scows in Portland, and they still didn't have enough, so they just shoveled it overboard. And finally, they lightened it enough, getting rid of the coal and pumps, and they moved it and beached it into Willard Beach, where they patched it, and then they took it to Boston for repairs. And in fact, I think you'll still find coal coming ashore, little pieces of it along the Cape, and I'm sure that's still coming from that, because there was about 5,000 tons of coal. water wash coal from that wreck. And of course, at Dyer Point, that's, you know, where the Whistle House is. There were several wrecks there, the sloop Resolution, I spoke about the Abigail, and then there was an Australia, the little schooner bound for Boston from Booth Bay with a cargo of ice and a deck load of mackerel, and she came ashore. And the schooner, the Mary Wiley, was a total loss. And one of the, out on, you know, Watts Ledge, oh, wait a minute. No, this, well, anyway, I'll skip that part. And I want to get enough. Oh yeah, this, I'll speak of the Grand Turk. That was a fairly big ship, and this was the first Grand Turk was a privateer, but this was an East Indiaman. And she came into Portland, and they had a hard passage, 259-day passage from Canton, China, and then stormed. They lost 3 men, and so they were all pretty bushed when they got here, and the whole crew went ashore and left nobody on the boat, and a northeast wind came up and it drove the boat ashore, the Grand Turk, on Cushing Point, that's in the harbor, and that was the end of that. And of course, another wreck that we hear a lot about is the schooner Charles. That the bride-to-be was drowned, and she's buried in the cemetery down by Crescent Beach Inn. But there were 22 aboard, and only 6 survived. So she ran on Watts Ledge. And then I remember there was a large yacht, a houseboat, ran on Watts Ledge, but that was later salvaged. And I think that probably just gives you a brief idea of what goes on. There's lots more information to be researched on, but anyway, that's you know, something that's been going on over the years.
Thank you. Now there's a question. I'd like to ask, what's the difference between a brig, a sloop, a bark, and a schooner? Just to refresh my memory.
Well, a sloop is a single-mast vessel.
Thank you.
A brig is a 2-mast, both square rigged. A schooner can have 2 or more masts, but they are fore and aft rigged. You know,
some people may have, you know, a fore and aft rig.
Well,
Everybody?
most of the sailboats you see today are so-called fore and aft rigged, the yachts. So,
What's the difference between a yacht and there's 2 of them, the pinnacles ahead of the sail, and I had to catch me up.
well, a yawl has the little mizmast back of the rudder, the wheel, and a ketch has it in front of the wheel, usually a little bigger sail too, but they're still smaller than the mainsail. But they each have their own purpose.
And a brig.
A brig, well, that's the 2-mast.
Well, that was the 2?
With
A bark.
A bark can be a 3 or more masts on which the aftermast has a little fore and aft sail on it. All the rest are square rigged. Could be 3, 4, and 5-masted bark. And a ship has square rig on all masts. It still has a small fore and aft on the aftermast, even though
Thank you.
Roger, one thing about this schooner Lockenbach you mentioned, 1946, I believe she came in on Portland Head.
32. I think.
32 was it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the last man off was named McKinney. He was the father of Sergeant McKinney of the Portland Police, Sergeant Fred McKinney of the Portland Police Department.
Yeah.
So I used to call Sergeant Fred a sort of a sea cook, because his father was sea cook on that.
Yeah.
And all he was able to see was his mandolin. He was the last man off.
Oh, well. Yeah, that went down. It's very deep there, and it just hit and was whole, and it sunk right off backwards. So. There was another schooner, another fishing schooner, one of the Noonans was sunk there too. I haven't been able to find out too much about that. I should, because it was after Lochinvar went on. But I do remember hearing about it.
Well, that was one of the Portland Fish Company books,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
We might be able to find out from Gwen Jordan's wife.
Oh, yeah.
She was a black, her father in the Portland Fish Company.
Oh, yeah. Well, should be. I should find out. I've inquired from the Harrises. They don't seem to remember, so anyway, well, but I do know there was another fishing schooner almost under similar circumstances in the Lochinvar.
Right, when did they start putting some donkey in to get a little bit more assistance in the dawn? Did they?
Well, the bigger vessels, because the, 3, 4, and 5, 6 masters, they had steam on, the bigger ones had steam winches, and they had steam pumps. But the little coasters, the 2-mast coasters, I don't know, when the little workhorse, the 2-flywheel engine, when they used that a lot for everything, and they used those to hoist sails and anchors and so on. Probably.
Did any of the schooners, the World War I era, did they ever have any?
Oh yeah.
Any propulsion from the engine?
No, they're always sail.
They always were sail. They weren't built for it.
No, they tried putting power in the schooners after the war to compete with the steamers, but it shook the schooner to all the pieces, so it didn't work. They weren't built for it. So they tried steam, and just later tried diesel, but it just never worked.
Were any of these Cape Elizabeth captains, or any of them captains from the Cape that were in any of the north?
No, I think, not that I know of, could be, but see, most of these vessels were coming from other ports, coming into Portland or going by and coming in here for shelter, so most of them, I think, were from away.
The Cape captains in there.
They have pilots now, but not then.
Pardon?
They have harbor pilots now, but not then.
Well, they didn't have to take them on. Well, there were pilots, because this Captain Willard was a pilot way back. Even when the Bohemia came in, she was supposed to take on a pilot. But something was a misunderstanding, and he didn't get out there. She ran ashore before he got out there. But they did have pilots for the bigger ships, square riggers, but for any of the coastwise vessels, the schooners, they never did.
Right, wasn't it Captain Bimwell that started the Portland pilots?
Could very well be. Well, I remember at that time it was kind of a competitive business. So, in fact, there was the little house, they used to call it Woodbine. It was down on the banking, down right on the shore, just by the Coast Guard station. And the pilots used to stay in there to watch for vessels, and they might sail out from there in sailboats. But Ben Willard was one of the pilots, and there were many others too. When I say it was a competitive business, but probably was rather unorganized. That's probably why they had, once they got more steamers, they had to have a better system, and so they formed the harbor pilots.
Have you got any information, Roger, when that ship was built down Elizabeth Park and launched in Broad Cove, launched in Zips Cove?
You mean not the one that Hannaford built?
Well, I don't know who built it, but it was built down there in Maroon's place, down in Elizabeth Park. And she would drug overland down to Zeb's Cove and walk down there.
Yeah, well, that was one of the Hannaford, yeah, I don't have it with me, but, I think in, Bill Jordan's book tells when it was built. Was the name Frederick Hannaford that built it? I think it was, yeah. That was a fairly good-sized vessel, 125 tons, I think, something like that. And
But a feet when they launched it.
sure, how many yoke of oxen was it?
Just under
100 yoke of oxen?
110 yoke of oxen. I can't even envision how many oxen lined up. Pulling them down across Appalachian.
All the shipbuilding was out where South Portland is now. I mean,
Down
there were
Prairie
none
Village.
built other than this one on anywhere else because there wasn't any place to
No.
launch some of them.
No,
Irma, do you remember any of the wrecks? Because
They stayed with us.
you remember they stayed.
No, but I always had from the Washington B. Thomas. I noticed you didn't speak about it.
Oh, well, I intended to.
In there somewhere, right?
I wanted particularly to speak about that because this Middlesex was built, the collier that ran on Willard Rock was built in 1912, and she ran ashore in 1922, but was repaired and saw service even after the Second World War. And the Washington B. Thomas was, because she was wrecked down on Staten Island, she was bound north to Portland with a load of coal. This was her first trip. Had been launched less than a year before that. When she was lost, they dragged anchor and went ashore. And all the captain's wife was there, and I believe she got hit in the head with a timber, and she was the only one who lost her life. The rest of the crew was saved.
I know the days, they were up there days, of course, like they said, Sam.
Yeah.
They were up there days,
Yeah.
trying.
I think that was 1903, I believe, that she ran ashore. Hell. Yeah.
Well, telling me like about mammals.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, I had it here, but
They're going to try to save it. That made her a good friend of mammals, that one.
yeah.
It's kind of interesting because he was talking about this wreck that he was and this marvelous man who saved it. And it turned out to be Sumner Dyer's, my grandfather. And when he found out it was Sumner Dyer's granddaughter, I had a baby. It was a coincidence.
You said your grandfather was a shipbuilder. No. Out of what port?
York Harbor. Wisdom. That's where he was born.
So we went back and forth between schooner.
Schooner, the granddaddy.
Roger, how large was the Odell on the ground on House Island?
And
How large was the Odell that was aground on House Island? Coming to the harbor, she was loaded with coal.
well, I don't remember it offhand.
My Uncle George Randall, Captain George Randall,
Oh.
takes out and bought the damn thing.
Oh, that.
And,
How long ago was that?
well, I was young, about 1916 or
Oh,
something.
yeah. I didn't.
I've never seen any record of it anyway.
No, I didn't include too many vessels that is in Casco Bay. I just mentioned that they right across from Portland Head and
Sure.
and this Washington B. Thomas and then the Howard Middleton. That was another one at low tide at Higgins Beach down near the Spurwink River. You can see the remains of the vessel, and that was a three-masted schooner that came ashore down there.
What was the name of that, do you
The
know?
Howard W. Middleton.
Middleton?
Middleton, yes.
There used to be a nice picture of that in the Higgins Inn up there, up over the
Yeah.
cashier's area.
I believe the name board is down Ram Island Farm Way, somewhere down that way. Somebody has the name board.
In my Franklin Cove, was the name was
The,
little school.
yeah, that was the Pan and Edith that came ashore at Post Neck.
Do any of you have relics of any of these?
I have a box. It was, how about this, it was made from wood. Was it from, I think it was Washington.
They stayed at
Was it the Bay State? The mother had it too. Beautiful, wooden box.
Well, my father's cottage at People's Cove was built along with the two schooners there, Kimball there, and they
Pocasset?
the cassette, the steering wheel was on the garage up one of them now, and the top mast of the flagpole was one of the spars up on the vessels down there now. So there's quite a lot of rubbish from up down there in that cottage.
This is where the Murrays got their start in the building business.
Could be, yeah. They speak about down Cape Cod, they had the Bow Rouge. They say that came from the old timbers from the wrecks, the ribs.
Right, I think you should photograph those two houses down there and have that documented on.
Yeah, we can have a record of your house.
I'll bring up the document that cottage sometime, and you wouldn't believe what went into that cottage, you know, the windows in it, the old original Robinson home that was tore down on Shore Road. And John Eben, as a young man, tore it down part of the place, and he put it in his barn over there. So when my father was going to build it, John told him he couldn't help himself, because he didn't want any of it. So doors, door frames, you know, and the windows and everything that come out of the original Robinson home. That was tore down, I guess it must have been tore down 1910 to 1915, 1912.
Maybe where the cottage was built from the lumber and all the parts from it, that sea that came up around a few years ago, might be telling you something.
Didn't your dad rebuild where the old first lock was, the old canal? Yeah, well, yes, the Alewife Brook.
They used to keep a dam in it, because the George people, he put a water main in the middle of the brook, all the way down Motion House Road, and then he dug up across the field to his house, you know. So they usually have to keep that thing. It wasn't a lock, but they have a dam there. So in the wintertime, they used to have to build the water level up. So the water pipe, you know, wouldn't freeze down. Then, even then, about 1 year out of 8 would freeze. So it wasn't part of the canal or anything like that.
There wasn't no canal down there, because of Jordan's history, and I read it somewhere else.
When they formed that great pond in agricultural mines, so they had flat valve and scow. They used to bring the peak down, and they used to put sails on them, sail them in the pulling. But the canal that they was building, they started to dig it the other way. They was going over through back of the Riverside Cemetery over there. They were going down through, and there's still some remains of the hand diggings over there in back of, where Park Around is now, down there in back of the apple orchard. But the canal that they were digging, that they never finished, was going the other way, not out of Line Brook. Now, why they chose to go that way to into the Spring River is beyond anybody's me, but that.
Well, could they do that without a lock going that way? Or they'd have to have a lock going that
Well,
way?
I don't think they'd have to have one, yes.
One.
Because, you know, they say that bog dam back on my property is the same level as the pond.
Yeah.
And there's a dam over there at Spring Avenue, but it's only 18, 20 inches. It was put there. In fact, I built the cement farm for it. It was built there. Phil Jordan was farming that land of where Donnie Layton lives now, you know, and he wanted to irrigate. This when they first started to irrigate. That was in 40, 41, that it was before the war, 38, 39. And that dam isn't too up there now. But that's where down back of Brown in the apple orchard right now, you can see where Vernon Brown told me, after they burned it there, we used to burn it quite often, you know, and Ben Brown told me that that's where they started to dig that canal through there.
Why did they go that way? They went backwards.
Well, first, Elwise Brook had a grist mill on it. And I suppose that, whether that was different trouble getting over that, I don't know. But see, down there to that high bank, down there to the old Holding House Road,
Yeah.
that's where the grist mill was. They had a water mill set up there.
Well, I think, excuse me, but I think that we will perhaps say thank you to Roger,
Yeah.
bring the meeting to an end.